in planting matters and in spiritual matters. And he already gives the law of the harvest here. But there's about 4 principles to the law of the harvest. And the first one is what he's saying here, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Now, I've never been a farmer, but I've always had gardens. And if I plant a bean seed, beans are coming up, right? If I plant a corn seed, corn is coming up. I've never got, now I'm country, so I've never got okra, not okra. We eat okra, not okra. I've never got okra, but for anybody in here that's fancy, I've never got okra off a cucumber patch. I've never got a tomato off of a squash plant. Because the law of harvest says what we plant, what we sow, is what we're going to reap. No matter what that, and by the way, when we plant spiritually and we sow our wild oats all week, don't come in here on Sunday and hit the altar and pray for a crop failure, because it ain't going to happen. But the first law of this here is what we plant or what we sow is what we reap. And that goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, where God made that plain in Genesis 1, verses 11 and 12. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And so it was. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw it was good. And then verse 24 and 25, and God said, let the earth bring forth a living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. A cow's going to have a cow, a pig's going to have a pig, a rat's going to have a rat. And then I've never understood, and a mosquito's going to have a mosquito, and I never understood why Noah didn't swat those mosquitoes. You know, the two of everything, why didn't he just swat them? But anyway, enough of that. So everything that God, this law of the harvest was put in place from the beginning. So what's the second principle of the law of the harvest? When I plant, or what we sow does not come up the same season we sowed it, correct? We sow in one season, we reap in another season. What we plant today, we do not go out and pick it tomorrow. What we plant, let's just run these parallel. So what we're sowing today, it's going to come up later. And the harvest is going to be there in another season. And Ecclesiastes has a good statement about that, 3:1 and 2. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. So the third step, or the third principle of the law of harvest, we always reap more than we sow. If we plant, Kathy and I used to plant about 6 rows of beans that went from here to there, and we'd get about 90 quarts out of that. And, you know, you drop your 2 or 3 beans and 2 or 3 and 2 or 3. You know how you do all that. We always got more than 2 or 3 beans on that plant. You plant one little kernel of corn, on the average you get 3 ears of corn. But that ear has more than one little kernel, correct? What young people need to understand is we reap a whole lot more than we sowed. And we don't reap it right. You know, David thought he was getting by with a whole lot, didn't he? He took Uriah's wife, and murdered Uriah. Then what did he reap? A dead son, and then a daughter that was raped by one of his sons, and then a son that was murdered by one of his sons, and then a son that tried to take over the kingdom, and then another son that was murdered. So he reaped a whole lot more than he sowed, did he not? So God is not going to be mocked. Now I'm going to save the fourth one for the end. So we reap what we plant. It comes at a different season, and it's a whole lot more than we ever planted. So now, he says, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Now, all that we do, we're either sowing in the flesh or sowing in the Spirit, correct? We're either doing what is honoring God or what is not honoring God. There's no in between. We're doing one or the other. It's either for Him or it's not for Him. We sow to the flesh, we're going to reap corruption. If we sow in the flesh, we get a bountiful harvest of corruption, correct? We can flaunt these laws in front of God, right in His face. We can think we're getting away with it, but sooner or later, we're going to reap what we sowed. Now, there's the positive side to this that we're getting to, because we always look at the bad side about be not deceived, God is not mocked. But there's a bright side to this too. So the bright side of this is, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Now, we'll get back to that part about the everlasting in just a minute. But now, so if we sow to the Spirit, as we walk in the Spirit, we're going to have a spiritual harvest, correct? Now, all this is tying together. It even goes back to the verse 6 about how we do things in this life and where it's going to take us. You know why there are so many miserable Christians? Well, I'll save that for after a while. I'll just save that for after a while. So we can flaunt this stuff in front of Him. We can think we're getting by with it. But sooner or later, 20 years down, I always try to tell young people, what the decisions you make, what you plant at 15, 16, and 17 may determine who you are at 25, 30, and 40. What you do today, the decisions you make today, teens, may determine who you are when you're 30, 40, 50 years old. Does that not happen? So, because they planted in this season, but way down the road, they reap the harvest. It was a guy in prison, and this is supposed to be a true story, that some new people had entered the prison, some big wheels or all was, and they tried to strike up a conversation with one of the prisoners that was sewing his clothes. And he said, "Sir, I see you're sewing." And the prisoner looked at him and said, "No, I'm reaping." So we're reaping things in our life that we never intended to see a harvest. Now, David, as I was talking about David a while ago, God forgave David for everything he did, but we still face the consequences. Things that I did as a young person, I can pay the price for it the rest of my life. In fact, I've told my children, because of the day that I decided to step away from serving God and begin to sow bad seed, I have the scars, I have the physical, mental, and emotional scars that I'll take to my grave. Why? God forgave me, but He did not take away the consequences. Because as sure as you drop it in the soil, it's coming up. Does that make any sense? Well, it has to, because that's an absolute law here, that what we sow, that's what we're going to reap. Now, He'll forgive you. He'll forgive us, but we'll pay the price. I know a young lady told me that she had an abortion. In fact, she had 2 or 3. To the point, finally, she could not have children because the abortion killed any opportunity to have children after she got married. She said, "I know God forgave me," but she said, "all I see in my mind is 3 children that I murdered." See, He forgave her, but that's something she'll ride to the grave. In fact, and also the fact that as much as she wanted children, so many abortions took away the possibility of ever having a child. This is a good lesson for our young folks to hear. Not that they're not being taught good now. I'm just saying this is a lesson for all of us, including them. So now he says, so if we sow to the Spirit as we walk in the Spirit, we're going to have a spiritual harvest, correct? We'll have an abundant harvest. Now there's another principle there that I hadn't mentioned. It's over in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. He says, but this I say, now this is talking about giving here, but this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. In other words, I can't expect, Kathy and I would get about 90 quarts of beans off of that little patch. I can't expect 500 quarts off of a little patch, correct? So we cannot expect, and by the way, let me tell you something. You hear, the principle over in 2 Corinthians 9 is saying, as we give, God gives back for the purposes of us to give back again, and he gives back that we might take the bounty and give back again. But if you give to get, you ain't getting. It's with that heart that wants to give, he'll bless that and give it back. Not for you to hoard it then, but to give it back again, and he gives it back and gives it. That's one thing I have against. We had a preacher a long time ago where I used to go to church on a faith promise thing. And all he pushed was you give, you get, you give, you get, you give, you get. He never said if you give with the heart of wanting to give. In other words, we don't get just because we give. We give. It's like these preachers where you say plant this $500 seed and you'll reap this and this. That's given to get. But if we give out of a heart to give, God will send it back to us to take it and give it again. Now that's the principle of that. So he says that we're going to reap what we sow, and it's either going to be the spiritual things or it's going to be things of corruption. So that, and then he says, and let us not be weary. He's simply telling us here not to lose courage or to lose heart, to keep standing strong, to keep pushing forward. Let us not be weary in well-doing. That just simply means honorable living. I'll just use myself as an example, or I could use any of it. I'll just use us all. Whatever we do, we ought to do it to honor God. It doesn't matter what it is. We ought to do it to honor him. On our job, it ought to be done in a way to honor him. Taking care of sick folks, it ought to be done in a way to honor him. In a grocery store, live a life that honors him. Let people see there must be something different about us. And as we do these things, and we'll get to the reason why, but just honorable living is what this is all about. Christians ought to live like Christians. We ought to not grow weary of trying to do the right thing. Pride in men, I'm just like any man. There's a lot of pride there. And when somebody mouths at me, I want to mouth back. Somebody cut me down, I want to cut back. Somebody tell a lie on me, I want to get even. But that's not the Christian way to do things. It takes a lot of prayer. It's a situation Kathy and I are going through now. I told her yesterday, I said, I got to pray that this thing don't get a hold of me. Because if it does, then there's the resentment that comes in and the anger that comes in. And then if that happens, how do I get up here and teach? Okay, let me turn it around. If that happens, how can you be what you're supposed to be? You can't, can you? That's not just for teachers and I saw a man do an honorable thing years ago. He left our church over anger at the pastor. About 6 months later, he came back. He stood up before the church and apologized to our church and to the pastor, hugged the preacher, and then went back to the church he left to go to. He had to make that thing right before he could be used anywhere else with God. So that's what this thing's about. We don't weary in living an honorable life. The worst thing a person, I guess I'm on the internet. Wouldn't it be a shame for somebody to see this on YouTube or somewhere and then see me mouthing off at somebody in a store or see me lose my temper? That's happened to me one time, and that guy put me in my place when he said he never thought he'd see me fail my God like I did. And all I done was got pretty loud. Didn't do any cussing, didn't do any threatening, but he could hear the junk coming out of me to where I hurt my testimony. You see what I'm saying? Honorable. He says, let's not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season, there's the third principle of the law of harvest. In due season, we shall reap. So, what are we supposed to be doing every day? Looking like a Christian, acting like a Christian, living like a Christian. Now, I'm going to get to some points in just a second. So, we're going to reap. We shall reap in due season if we faint not. So we keep doing the well-doing. We keep doing the well-doing. We keep doing the well-doing. Down the road somewhere, things are going to change. We'll start reaping what was sown if we faint not. But what causes us to faint? What causes us to lose our devotion to the Lord? Because that must be what's happened. It's kind of like this. And it's true in every church, but does it have to be true in this one? If we put as much effort into things out there as we do in here, nothing would ever get done out there, would it? In other words, what I'm saying, if I put the same interest in mowing my yard as I put in as if people put as much interest in mowing their yard as they do coming to church, the front would be mowed this week. Maybe next week the back would be mowed. And maybe next week nothing would be mowed. And 3 or 4 weeks later nothing would still be mowed. Do you see the point I'm trying to make? If we put interest in our everyday life like we do at the church, in our job, we'd already been fired from our job, right? I mean, let's just get down to the point of this thing. How are we reaping a harvest when we're sowing nothing? Now, how can we sow a harvest if we're halfway planting? We're not. I heard a man tell me, he said, you know, our church, he said, if we don't have enough on Sunday, he said it's embarrassing to have a special group to come in and sing because it's so few there, it's embarrassing. He said, I guess every church is that way. And I said, but why does ours have to be that way? Why does yours have to be that way? Why is other churches that way? Why is it that when they pan the church in so many, there looks like flies on a cow's back? It's so scattered. Why does it have to be that way? Because somewhere down the line, we've lost our devotion to the Lord. And that's easy to do because why? We're flesh. But that's not the excuse. Maybe we've dropped it on our prayer life. Maybe we get so caught up in worldly affairs and trying to run here and run there. I text the preacher this week, and he won't mind me saying this. I text him, I said, pray that I can get a clear mind long enough to study. Because trying to do what's going on in the mountains and at home and then just trying to take care of everyday things and the health of my wife and my own health and doing things, I told Kathy, I said, at the end of the day, my mind is spent. It's empty. It's gone. And I text the preacher. He says, do you need a break? And I told him, I said, I could not sit in my spot on my Sunday to teach without being plumb miserable with somebody teaching in my spot. In other words, it's not time to quit. It's time to get back in line with God. It's time for all of us. Life is tough. What I just explained about mine is not near as tough as what you're going through. But the same God can help us through it. Is that not true? God has the same grace for all of us. But somewhere down the line, Paul had to warn them, if we faint not. He says, don't be weary. You're getting weary in your well-doing. You see, everything we do is supposed to honor God. Everything we're supposed to do. And it's hard because we're still flesh. But if we pray about it all the time, just like I told Kat yesterday about this thing, I said, Kathy, I said, if I'm not careful, this is going. So what do? I got to pray. I got to keep pushing. We can't get weary, class. I read this week a lost person. Well, let me change that. I've never seen anything spiritual out of this man that had a statement on Fox News that the church is being attacked and the church is in trouble. A friend of mine, that he has probably been to church twice in his life, from what he tells me. He is not saved. He told me the other day on the phone, he said, have you noticed how the church they're trying to destroy the church? And this is a man that knows nothing about the church. He just reads, he just listens. And he knows the church is trying to be. So if we can't keep up with the footmen, what are we going to do when the horsemen come? As Jeremiah, I'm paraphrasing what Jeremiah said. And the next part of that is about the swelling of the Jordan, and that always has to do with warfare. So if we can't deal with it now, what are we going to do when Biden, Kamala Harris, Schumer, Pelosi, and all these others attack the church more than it's being attacked now? I never would have thought I would have seen so many churches bow to Caesar this past year. It is a shame the number of churches that bowed before the God Caesar instead of bowing before the Almighty God. I don't understand it. I can't get it in my head how the same people that quit coming to church never quit going to Walmart, fuss because they couldn't go to restaurants, and as soon as they could, they did, but still no church. I can't figure that out, how some churches are still having outside service. I can't understand why some churches, the doors are still shut. I can't understand why people think that this is what you do when there's nothing else to do. Can you? It's called being weary and fainting because of the tough times in life. And everybody runs into tough times. But nobody, including me, has an excuse to quit God. Do I or do you? Now, do I have an excuse to stand up here this Sunday and say, I'm stepping down for 2 or 3 months and let Roger take over because I've got a mom-in-law that's in bad shape, my mama that's in bad shape, and Kathy's stuff is getting worse, and my stuff is getting worse, and I've got painting to do at the house, and I can't get the yard mowed, and I need to run here and there, so I'm going to quit for 3 or 4 months. Would anybody accept that? Would you? It wouldn't be right if you did. Let me put it that way. If you would accept me doing that, it means you would fall for the same thing and do it yourself. My job, God says don't quit. He says keep going. That's what I'm seeing. And you say, well, you don't know how it is. We all know how it is. But none of us have an excuse to quit. I can't see. If you can come up with an excuse for me to quit, come and show me. If you can come up with an excuse for you to quit, come and show me. Now, Kathy's not here today because my mom can't be left alone. I won't be here tonight. She will because my mom can't be left alone. But that doesn't mean we quit. It means we're trying to honor God with our parents and honor God by being here at our place of service. Now, my wife taught for 20-some years. Children that she taught, I think 5 to 8, grown with their own children, would come to church. Just some of them moved to another state. When they coming back in the air, they came to church for one reason, to see the woman that gave them little children 3 years of their life. We got pictures of the children and their children because she never would quit. And we don't need to quit. Back to the reaping. What she planted 20-some years ago with the first groups, she saw the harvest years later. When we worked with a youth group, and I told Kathy sometime, I said, I need to line every one of them up and shoot them. Years later, these same ones are in churches heading up youth groups. Some of them are preachers. Some of them are preachers' wives. Some of them that I thought best thing to do with it, I told them one day, I said, the only thing I know to do is try to make y'all as miserable as y'all have made me sometime. Cutting up with them. We'd have play practice, and we'd start in October. And by the time of the Christmas play, that's why I don't have any hair other than driving a truck. But and then they'd get up there and they would do perfection. But all of them, we didn't reap the harvest then. we reaped it later. Did all of them go good? No. Some of them went terrible. Some of them went to jail. But some of them are working for the Lord still. Some that I never thought would be, you know, the race that we run, some of them was so far back you couldn't have seen them with binoculars. And now they're leading youth groups now. So what I'm trying to say, and it says, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men. All men. Doing good is more than just what we're doing here. It requires doing good to all people, and we witness with the words and we witness with works. That's how some people, they need to see our works. Or why else can we witness to them if they don't see us, see what we witness in action? You know, Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. That goes back to everything we do is to honor Him. And you see this thing about be not deceived, God is not mocked. When we sow good, He's going to bless that sowing with reaping a good spiritual harvest. When we sow to corruption, we're going to reap corruption. When we sow and not grow weary, we're finally going to see the crop come up. And we're going to see the bud, it's budding and then blooming. Does that make any sense? Either the good side or the bad side is going to come up and bloom. And the fourth principle of the law, or it'd be the fifth principle, the law of the harvest. I can't do a thing about what I planted yesterday, can I? But I can sure do something about what I plant from here on out, can I? Now, I can't change yesterday's sowing, and it'll come up. But I can do something about everything else I sow from here on out, can I not? Now, one other thing. How many has one rung or two? One other thing. When we decide about this thing of growing weary and fainting, when we decide to get on fire for God, and the people that come to preaching decide that all church is important and working out there is important. Just like Nehemiah, Sanballat and Tobiah is going to show up. Now, they're not dead. They're alive and well in every church. Now, when this church decides to really get on fire, Sanballat and Tobiah will rear their head in this church. They may be sitting here today, just waiting on the time that we decide. And Sanballat, the whole thing Sanballat and Tobiah done was to discourage the people. To grow weary of the threats, to grow weary of what's surrounding it, to cause them to faint. But Nehemiah never compromised, and the people never stepped off the wall. When we all get our place on the wall, and Sanballat and Tobiah rears our ugly head in this place, if we're doing what He's give us directions, faint not, keep doing the well-doing, keep doing what we're supposed to. And when this church does catch on fire, as we do good to all men, especially taking care of the household of faith, it'd be a shame to go out yonder and help somebody and let somebody in here starve to death. It'd be a shame to go out there and cancel somebody there and somebody here with a broken heart and people here in here hurting, and we're worried about somebody out there. That's not selfish. That's what this is saying. Be honorable and do good to all men, especially the household of faith. So that's our priority. Out there, but out there in general, in here in particular, taking care of one another, being what we're supposed to be to one another, supporting one another, doing honorable things with one another. So today, if you're here today lost, those seeds of corruption will take you one direction, hell. The seeds of the spiritual sowing, of course we reap everlasting life. If we ask the Lord Jesus Christ to save us, because we're not sowing spiritual till we become one of His. And then these things, we're going to reap the harvest here and in heaven. So what are we doing? What are we doing? We can't change what we planted yesterday, but we can change what we plant today. Lord, I ask that this lesson made a little bit of sense and help somebody, Lord. And I know your word doesn't go out void. I just pray, God, that this will be a help to people. In Jesus' name, amen.